What is this cool and mysterious new color film with punchy packaging that keeps cropping up on my Instagram feed? In today's video, I'm going to talk about it. Reflx Lab's Pro 100 is a fine-grain, high-fidelity color film stock that captured my summer of 2023. I was lucky enough to score 3 rolls of this straight from Reflx Labs themselves, so a big shout out to them for making that happen. In this video, I am going to talk about the specs, the history, and the strong suits of this film stock. I'll share the images that I captured with it, both unedited and edited versions as usual, to illustrate the features that I'm going to discuss. For those of you who are new here, my name is Yvonne and I put out new photography-related content almost every week. So if you like this video, you can go and check out the others on my channel. I do video essays, street photography POVs, and of course, film reviews. And you can also subscribe to get a new photography-related video almost every week. So, with all of that said, and without further ado, let's jump right in and talk about specs. This is a 35mm color negative film with a box speed of 100 ISO. Typically, you would want to process this in C41, but it doesn't have a remjet layer, and so you can cross-process it in E6. It retails for around $12 USD or $15 Canadian, which is fairly cheap for a film stock of this caliber. It's daylight balanced, so it's great for shooting outdoors in the summer, which I did quite a bit. And it has a very fine grain structure, as you can see. It's also got a wide exposure latitude, according to the datasheet, which naturally allows for some versatility. And it also comes in this nice little tin canister, which I love, and if I had acrylic nails, this would be some ASMR. With many of the color films that I review on this channel, we delve into the question of who actually manufactures this film. Thankfully, with this one, we don't have to delve into that question because it states outright on Reflx Lab's website that this is, drumroll please, Kodak Aerocolor 2460. I don't know how people are saying that. It is really nice and really refreshing to have some transparency from the distributors. This is respooled Kodak Aerocolor. They buy a bulk roll of Kodak Aerocolor and they respool it onto these consumer-friendly rolls and market it as Pro 100. And maybe because this is essentially bulk loaded, I got more than 36 exposures on each of my rolls. On the first and third rolls I shot, I got 38 exposures, and on the second roll, I got 40. So that is a cool bonus and some pretty good bang for your buck. Since we know that this is Kodak Aerocolor 2460, that gives me a lot more information about the film to talk about in this video. So, let's talk about Aerocolor. Not to be confused with Aerochrome. Oh my god, they are very different. Both Aerochrome and Aerocolor are aerial surveillance films made by Kodak. Aerochrome is a false color film, similar to Lomochrome turquoise or Lomochrome purple or something like that. Back when aerial surveillance was done on film, it had utility for distinguishing naturally green things like foliage from objects that had been painted green. Obviously, this was useful in detecting things like enemy vehicles and bases that had been painted green in order to conceal them in a wooded environment. It's very cool, and we will talk about Aerochrome in better detail one day on this channel because I did recently purchase a roll of it. I'm terrified to shoot with it because it is very expensive, like more than $10 per frame, and I do not accept feedback on my poor financial decisions. But stay tuned for that in the future. Aerocolor, on the other hand, is a true color film, which renders colors as closely to their actual colors as possible. According to the datasheet, Aerocolor is intended primarily for aerial mapping functions and is suited for pollution, geological, archaeological, crop and forestry studies, traffic control, city planning, railway, highway, and hydraulic engineering, oceanography, and remote sensing. Basically anything that you may need to make a map of from the sky. It was introduced in 2009 and is designed to have improved haze penetration for high altitude photography and an increased green saturation for better foliage reproduction. It also has a finer grain structure and higher resolution with improved sharpness. It is pretty cool. It's a pretty good film. But you can imagine that the people using this film for these stated purposes, or at least who had used this film before digital alternatives took over, were using quite a lot of it at a time. And a tiny little 36 exposure roll wouldn't go very far when you're mapping an entire ecosystem from 5,000 feet in the air. Which is why this film has historically been sold in bulk only, and typically to government agencies involved in aerial surveillance. This bulk-only sale means that Aerocolor has traditionally not been super available to consumers. As you might imagine, a bulk roll is quite expensive. So if you're asking yourself, well, why should I buy this film from Reflx Labs and not from Kodak? Here's your answer. One bulk roll of this film can cost you upwards of $150,000. And will provide enough material for around 18,000 36 exposure rolls. So, do you want these nice houses in Japan, or a single bulk roll of Kodak Aerocolor? Thank God we have a variety of companies who are willing to buy up these massively expensive bulk rolls, chop them up, and repackage them so that we can buy them for $11 USD. There's a few companies out there these days that are selling Kodak Aerocolor under different brand names, and I won't get into that now because I actually have a few rolls of one of them in my fridge, and I'm really looking forward to making a video delving into the unique histories and mysteries of those companies. So stay tuned for that in a future video. But suffice to say, Reflx Labs is certainly one of the better options for purchasing this film stock, because $11 USD is getting you around 38 frames of Aerocolor, which stands out among the competitors in terms of price point. One more thing I should mention about this film is that it is missing the orange mask that many C41 color films have. I, admittedly, had a hard time figuring out what that meant. I asked Reddit and the responses were less than helpful. This person was able to teach me about what the orange mask is, but not about the utility of removing it. So I'm not sure why being a maskless color film is significant. Maybe somebody down in the comments can explain. That would be great. Please do if you can. But the removal of this mask does apparently make this film slightly more difficult to color correct in post. So if you're using a cheaper lab like London Drugs, chances are you might get back some funky looking scans if they're unaware of these steps required for color correcting these significantly less orange looking negatives. Another interesting piece that I might have mentioned earlier is that this film does not have a remjet layer, which means that it can be cross-processed in E6. And I did do that for one of my rolls, and I did get some interesting results. And speaking of results, that's enough talk of specs and history, etc. Now I want to share my experience shooting with this film. My experience. I review a lot of film on this channel, and for most of them I only have one roll to go off of. For this video, I had the privilege of shooting 3 rolls, courtesy of Reflx Labs. So a big thank you to them for sending those my way, because I had enough exposures to play around quite a bit, and I also had that extra roll to try cross-processing. Shout out also to the lab in Vancouver for not charging me an arm and a leg to cross-process all 38 frames of this. As usual in my film review videos, I shot as wide a variety of images as I possibly could with this film to test out how it performs in a variety of different settings. So, going over that variety really quickly, we have some studio portraits, natural light portraits, flowers in nature, double exposures, landscapes, of course, which are basically the intended function of this film. I tried some with this weird filter, and some street photos, protests, portraits with strobe lighting, and others with continuous lighting, and this one with both strobe and continuous lighting. And I even took some shots at the aquarium to test out how this film would perform in lower light conditions. So we have a pretty robust sample of images here, and some even have some nice light leaks on them. I believe this is called light piping. And this particular pattern of light leak is a risk with bulk-loaded film specifically. You can alleviate that risk by loading it into your camera in a darker environment and keeping it out of direct sun, which obviously I did not do. Looking at all of the photos that were processed in C41, we can see that it does indeed have a very fine grain structure, and it handles high contrast scenes very well. The shadow toning is honestly very good, and it's almost in the ballpark of being a true black. Many of the other color films that I've reviewed on this channel and that I've shot with otherwise have shadow toning that seems to range between muddy green and jewel tone blue. And so comparing those to this stock, I am really impressed by how this stock renders those lower light areas. There is an emphasis on green tones that comes through in the shadows sometimes, particularly in my day-lit street photos, but even then, I think this is pretty good. I would say that the colors in this film stock are very high fidelity, and the shadow toning overall is a great asset to this film. When it comes to midtones, highlights, etc., the film naturally prefers green tones, being intended for aerial photography, which typically involves capturing lots of greenery. You can see from these pictures that the articulation between different shades of green is really remarkable. Compare that to the green tones in some of these other color film stocks, and you can see how much better Aerocolor is in this regard. Another aspect that the Aerocolor datasheet talks about is the haze penetrating capabilities. Here's a picture of Montreal on a particularly hazy day, so you can see for yourself. And here's some footage of that same vista of Montreal so that you can compare. The original Kodak press release announcing the film in 2009 boasts that the film has a higher resolution with improved sharpness. And from these images, I can certainly attest that that is very true. The level of detail in these images is pretty incredible for a 35mm frame. I mean, look at these trees. Look at this spray coming off the base of this waterfall. This level of detail alone makes me want to shoot with this film again. The way it captures nature and landscapes is really unrivaled, in my opinion. And even on the cross-processed shots, which turned out a little funky, look at that detail. That's pretty incredible. And speaking of the cross-process shots, let's have a look at a few of those now, shall we? Admittedly, I really flubbed my exposure with a lot of these. The highlights are very blown out. And if I was to do this roll over again, I would certainly underexpose it by at least a stop or two. But that said, I did get some pretty cool results, and I was able to salvage some more of them in Photoshop as well. Unsurprisingly, maybe, the best cross-processed shots were the ones taken on a hike up in the Kootenay Mountains. And once again, look how good that level of detail in the greenery is. Even when processed in this funky way, you get this really nice articulation between pieces of foliage. The colors it renders when cross-processed do remind me quite a bit of Lomochrome purple, particularly in the skin tones, which always go fairly purple. Anything green goes a deeper blue-green, kind of a jewel tone, and true blues shift to more of a greeny turquoise. Yellow tones seem to stay more or less the same, and so do pink and red tones. Although I do feel like the pink and red tones get a little more saturated and maybe shift a little bit more towards the magenta end of the spectrum. I did shoot a bunch of really high contrast scenes on this roll with super bright sunlight and super harsh shadows, and they all give a bit of an early 2000s like edgy photo edit vibe. Like how you'd edit something with like a picnic filter back in the day. I did honestly have fun with this cross-processed roll, but I wouldn't recommend doing it. At least not for anything other than like good old-fashioned lomographic fun. The results on this cross-processed roll do not hold a candle to the beautiful, well-articulated, high-fidelity colors of this film when it's processed in C41. And it might almost be a bit of a faux pas to waste such a beautiful film stock on lomographic pursuits. So, getting back to C41, some of my favorite shots that I took on this film were of flowers. And there's something about the way that it renders the contrast between green and red tones that just hits me, you know? I spoke a bit about the obviously great green tones, but the red tones are really breathtaking as well, particularly when shot in daylight, but also in these photos using continuous LED lights in studio. You really get these robust red tones that jump out of the image, especially when contrasted with blues and greens. Usually when I shoot film, I wind up tweaking it quite a bit in Photoshop to get the color toning that I'm looking for. But for these Reflx Labs Pro 100 images, I barely tweaked them at all. Basically all I did in Photoshop was drag the shadows down a little bit to increase the contrast in some of these shots. And it should be noted that for a lot of the photos you're seeing, I didn't edit them at all because they came right out of the scanner looking absolutely gorgeous. So the colors you're seeing in a lot of these images are in line with what you can expect to get straight off the roll when metered correctly, which is pretty fantastic. So, overall, I can confidently say that I highly recommend shooting with this film. I feel like a lot of my film reviews have a pretty even balance of pros and cons, but this one is really all pros. It has great colors, great variation in green tones and punchy red tones. It has fine grain and extremely sharp detail. It's great for high contrast scenes with bright sun, and it has a fun lomographic capacity when cross-processed. It has an interesting history, an affordable price point, typically more than 36 frames on the roll, and it comes in this tiny little tin canister, which I really prefer to plastic packaging. I am going to give this film a 10 out of 10. And not just because Reflx Labs did me a solid by sending me 3 rolls to try out, but because I legitimately adore 90% of the photos that I took with it. And the remaining 10% were a result of my own creative deficits and mishandling of the film, so here they are, just for the sake of transparency. So that is everything that I had to say about this film stock. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, you can leave a like, you can leave a comment letting me know what you thought, if you've tried this out before, or if you've tried a different brand's version of Kodak Aerocolor. I will be keen to hear about it down in the comments. You can subscribe to my channel to get a new photography-related video almost every week. And I will see you guys next week and maybe talk about some objects captured on film. Or maybe not. We'll see. So I will see you guys next week, and in the meantime, I want you to stay sharp and don't forget to keep shooting. Bye, guys.